Hi, this is George Rotterman, and welcome to another episode of the High Pressure Podcast. Today is really a special day. We have Rich Gottwald. He's the CEO and president of CGA. That's the Compressed Gas Association. Rich, I'll tell you, the last time we saw each other was in person was in Washington, D.C. when we were at a GATA convention. But it's so great to have you today. It's virtual, but it's so great to have you today. So welcome to the High Pressure Podcast.
Oh, great, George. I'm really happy to be here and to talk to you and your listeners about some of the things that we're working on. And can't wait till we can be back together in person. But for now, this will suffice.
Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the things, I know you're a very humble person, but I mean, really, as president and CEO of the CGA, it's quite an organization, unlike a lot of things where really it's all the members which volunteer their time. And you've got you got to be on cue because you got some of the top industry leaders on your board, and you have some of the top industry leaders on all your different committees.
Yeah, George, it really is amazing. I've been involved almost 3 years now, and it's an amazing organization. It's been around since 1913, and in that time, the whole focus has always been writing safety standards for the industry. We basically write the standards that regulate the industry, and that's a really good place to be in when you're basically regulating your own business. And CJ over the years has done a really good job in doing that.
They really have. I mean, that foresight, putting those headlights on, looking way ahead, right, to find out what things could possibly be a problem before they become the problem. Or in many cases, that's what safety is all about, right? Really looking at all the safety issues. You guys really do an outstanding job in that area. I was going to lead into something right now that everybody's hearing about, and it's pretty fascinating. Behind the scenes, our industry, or many of the different parts of the industry the Compressed Gas Association deals with, are doing many things behind the scenes that people aren't all that aware of. And then all of a sudden it pops up to the forefront, one of which is dry ice. And it's become a big conversation piece, right? Where does dry ice come from? Do we have enough dry ice? And of course, we get back to the vaccine. We look at, the fact that dry ice is 190 degrees, and I think it's 94 degrees that they have to keep this vaccine at, right? So now we have a vaccine that has to be kept cold or it won't be, good to use. And through the whole transport thing. And I know you, which is pretty cool, even use the Star Trek, word here, but we got warp speed, right? You've been involved with the warp speed and the Homeland Security. And I wanted to get your take on where we're at and how this is affecting all of us relative to dry ice.
Yeah, sure. Today's a big day. This morning when I woke up, I looked at my phone and I had an alert from one of the news organizations saying that the first vaccine was given out in the UK today. The first clinically approved vaccine was given out today. So today's a huge day in my world anyway. Hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel here. Dry ice is playing a really important role here. We got involved, probably 60 days or so when we started getting calls, because when it became apparent that the Pfizer vaccine has to be kept really cold, it became obvious that the only way to do that outside of ultra cold refrigerators, which a lot of people don't have, is going to be dry ice. So over the course of a month or so, we spoke with everybody. We were talking with the Department of Homeland Security, Operation Warp Speed, Pfizer, the suppliers of all the CO2 that has turned into dry ice, trying to get an understanding of what the requirements were for the vaccine, how much, when it was going to be available, how much dry ice would be needed for the distribution. And really, we're talking about distribution. Once Pfizer releases it, it's really like taking it from those facilities out to, I'll call them far-flung places in the United States, but really any cities and towns. So it was really an interesting process in trying to understand how it's going to be distributed and how much dry ice is going to be needed. If I just say, we put out a statement about 2 weeks ago that looking at all those numbers, we are very confident that we can meet the demands of the distribution, the demands of dry ice is needed for distribution. Yeah. So, I'm getting lots of calls from the press and others wondering, is there going to be enough? And our answer is yes. From everything we see at this point, there's going to be enough of dry ice.
And when we look at dry ice, would you mind touching on the markets, like the different market segments that uses of dry ice today? I know there's certain areas that the airlines use it for a lot of things, for keeping things cold when they do their transport, and the food industries for Omaha steaks, things like this. But could you touch on maybe kind of the segments and what their basic usage of dry ice or CO2 is? Not just
Yeah.
dry ice, but CO2 in
Yeah,
general.
so let's start with CO2. So dry ice is basically the solid version of CO2. So CO2, so CGA members go, and for the most part, CO2 is an off gas from other industrial gas productions, whether it be ethanol, ammonia, fertilizer manufacturing. CO2 tends to be a very pure off gas there. So our members collect that CO2. They clean it up a bit, they liquefy it a bit, and then they sell it to other markets. So the number one use of CO2 is food processing, and that's like beef, pork, chickens, things like that. A lot of CO2 is used in those markets, whether it be to stun the animals or using processing of meats. And about 47% of CO2 goes there. The next use is dry ice. Dry ice is around 15 to 17% of CO2 goes into the dry ice market. Then the third use is beverages, sodas, beer, things like that. That's another about 15, 16%.
Yeah.
In terms of dry ice, that is used for cooling, as you mentioned, whether it be things like Omaha steaks or other products that need to be kept cold when they're shipped. It's used for a lot in creating smoke and steam in some sort of productions, whether they be television or stage productions. It's used to remove graffiti. Basically, you can spray wash a wall with dry ice, and the graffiti is removed, and the dry ice disappears. So it's sort of
it's a good replacement for sandblasting environmentally.
Absolutely, yeah. But in this case, keeping things cold is really the number one use for it.
So there was a big shortage due to a lot of the ethanol plants, shuttering or being slow because there was not as much demand for ethanol, and that was causing quite a shortage in the industry. Do you feel that the reason we won't have a shortage for distribution of the vaccines is because the beverage market might be down a lot right now, with a lot of restaurants being, closed down or slower than normal?
Back in the spring, when we really had a shortage of ethanol, and we pulled together a coalition and went to the vice president's office because they were heading up the coronavirus task force. The concern there was the country literally shut down late March, early April, and driving stopped, which meant gasoline use stopped, and therefore ethanol. So at that point, I think the numbers were the ethanol markets were down 40, 50%. The ethanol plants just stopped running. Once we get out of March and April and into the late spring, early summer, things started to come back. We kind of learned to live with COVID, is I think the way I put it, is that people started driving again. Life resumed to somewhat a sense of normal and people doing errands and things like that. So we saw ethanol markets come back on. The last I heard was, I think, maybe a few weeks back, and the ethanol markets were about at 90% of capacity.
Yeah.
So coming back online like that is really what gives us the confidence that there'll be enough CO2 for dry ice. Our estimates are that earlier I said about 15, 16% of CO2 goes into dry ice. We estimate that to meet the vaccine demands, that's going to be an additional 5% of that 15% is needed. So It's not a huge amount. It's not a huge amount. It is, significant, but looking at the systems, we think there is enough capacity in place to meet that 5%.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine from a distribution perspective, when you look at all the small towns, the big towns, and trying to get dry ice to all the right places or for the shipping, that will be a logistic strategy, I'm sure, that many people will be working on. And I think you had some level of involvement with that as well, with the distribution ability for that.
And I think that's where the challenge is going to be, right? This is not a new application for dry ice, as you mentioned, Omaha steaks and things like that, shipped around the country, around the world all the time. I think what the focus is here is that it's such a critically important application in this case that we've got to get it right. Now, our members are supplying either the CO2 or the dry ice directly to different aspects of the distribution. And I know that they're working very closely to make sure that the smallest towns around the country get the amount of dry ice that's needed. And we'll be working closely with them to see whether they need any assistance in connecting with the government and different agencies. But we're pretty confident they're working those connections now.
Yeah. And that's such a reassuring thing to know that there's been so much thought put into this. They have, top organizations like yours involved and be able to really make this all happen. And for all of us, it's a benefit to every single, person in our country. So it's a fantastic and very positive to hear that. Thanks, for filling us in with that. I do have this question. What was the most fascinating thing or interesting thing that's happened while you're working on Warp Speed? Is there anything stands out to you where you've kind of had one of those aha moments for yourself, or kind of when you're taking a shower, you go, that was pretty cool.
I would say, back in the spring when we were working on this, and I was on a call with some other association execs, we're talking about, so at that time it was around medical oxygen and CO2 shortage, and the vice president came on the phone. Pence came on the phone and started asking a few questions. So we were able to connect right to the very top of the country and give them the confidence that we had the ability to supply the products that was so needed. Back in the spring, it was around medical oxygen and CO2 for food supply. But that was pretty neat, I thought, to be able to talk to the vice president.
Go home and say, honey, I talked to the vice president today. That's pretty cool. Not so many people can say that they've had that day. That's pretty neat. That's cool. That's great. The thing about the association, it deals with a lot of different markets and emerging markets. And when everything's an emerging market, right, that's when you guys really kick in, because we got safety issues, things that maybe people haven't thought about yet because they haven't, that paradigm, right? People aren't doing it yet. And when I look at that, there's a couple markets out there that you have spent quite a bit of time on. I think one of which is the cannabis. I call it the marijuana, which I guess shows me wrong age here. I know it's cannabis now. We're supposed to say, correctly. But in that cannabis market, whether it be extraction and all the different things that happen in that market segment, certain states it's legalized. As states get legalized, you see a big boom of people going and jumping into that market segment. Is there some things that you would, point out, a couple of key things you ran into that you would want gas distributors to know about, the people, selling the products to those different market segments? Is there a couple standouts for you?
Yeah, that's a good question, George, because what we do is we write the safety standards for these products, for our products, and as they become used in different applications, it means either writing new standards for those applications or educating the new users, and that's kind of where we are here. The cannabis market is a really good example. I have here that in 2019, the cannabis sales worldwide were basically $15 billion. By 2024, that's estimated to be $43 billion. Wow. So pot is a big business, right? And what we are seeing as it explodes, particularly in the States and in Canada, is a lot of small, I'll call them mom and pop companies, are getting into the business. They're learning that they can grow the product and sell it pretty easily. But they're using our products. They're using things like carbon dioxide as a growth accelerant. Propane and butane are used to either heat facilities or to extract certain agents in the processing. Nitrogen's used for extraction as well. So as they start using these gases, they probably don't understand some of the hazards associated with them. So we're teaming up. There's an association for everything, and there's an association for the cannabis industry. And we're working with the cannabis industry to take our standards so they know how to apply those standards to their products, but also developing very specific communication pieces for them so that they know how to use the different gases in their business. The last thing we want is for an accident to happen, because as you know, the products can be pretty dangerous.
Yes.
So we're working with them to educate them on that. So I would say to the distributors, watch that market. It's just exploding. It literally is just growing leaps and bounds.
And to your point, with like a safety thing, right? A person that is jumping into that market and starting to say, "Hey, I can have better growth from my plants." And again, I'm saying marijuana, or you said pot, so we're both not too cool with the right wording, right? We're supposed to say cannabis, but they go, "Oh wow, I want to grow my plants. I'm going to blow some CO2 in there." That's just like fantastic for those plants to want to grow. But also you get asphyxiation, right? Because you displace oxygen in a room. So now, does somebody know that? Are they aware of that? Do they have an alarm or all the things that may happen, right? Or you're using butane for extraction. You have many different elements that can happen around that. So So you guys have a focus on that, and there's information that a distributor could get that would help them guide them through some of those elements.
Yeah, so actually right now, they don't have it, we don't have it yet, but they're under development. So they're developing these posters and guidelines on how to use the product. So as those become more available, we'll make sure that we communicate through our website. We also work very closely with GATA to make sure that GATA's distributors have access to it as well. So they're under development now. They're not ready just yet. You know, you mentioned that for a moment there. There's two different types of cannabis, right? The way I thought it's just sort of interesting the way the industry describes it. There is what they call the medical market, and then they call it adult use. They used to call it recreational, but adult use. And in 2019, 71% of the cannabis market was medical, and about 30% was adult use. Well, in 2020, it's 50-50. There's more cannabis going into the adult use market.
Yeah. And I believe that's mostly the extraction. That's mostly, you know, getting the oils extraction and all the other market segments, right? Edibles and all the things that go along with that, which that even gets into packaging and all the different gases you can maybe use for packaging and preserving products. Yeah, it's very fascinating. Yeah. And the speed in which it's happening, right? I mean, it's what might happen in 10 years was happening in 1 year. It's just an amazing speed.
You know, it's all so far has been a state by state effort, but you may know, I think just last week, the House of Representatives here in DC basically agreed to take up the concept of legalizing marijuana. Now it's more than likely not going to get through the Senate, but it is just the fact that it's being discussed at the highest level here in DC shows where it's headed.
Right. Yes. Great. When we go to other markets, you know, there's some other markets. Also, I want to touch on one thing. There are some issues with cylinders coming back that you have to worry about, possibly things being brought back into a cylinder, and being aware of the fact that that cylinder could get contaminated if you don't have check valves and things. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, one of the things I think that the distributors can get from us is we put out a lot of guidelines on how you do stuff like this. So for instance, I'm looking here, we have, you know, guidelines for cleaning externally contaminated medical gas cylinders, or any cylinders for that matter, but how you clean cylinders, because you do want to make sure that in this example, whether it be to the cannabis market, you want to make sure that if that cylinder is going back and is going to be used for something else, that it has been cleaned appropriately. And so one of the things that we do is develop guidelines on how you make that cleaning happen to make sure that they're not contaminated.
We have a number of our customers that work in that market very strongly, and we have got product lines we brought out where they can have all, for like cryogenic, some people call them dewars or cryogenic tanks, that they can put the fittings on, which will not allow back pressure into the tank, so it keeps you from getting contaminants in the tank that you might fill later and then redistribute. And the same thing, RPV valves are available for the high pressure tanks. So that's a really good way to go to ensure. But then you want to make sure you have that type of a dedicated equipment for that particular market, right? So you dedicate to that market, then you know you've got a way to keep the safety there. The other market I think is interesting because it's not something, you know, you hear about it, but it's not, I don't think, to the point of what it really is going to be, which is hydrogen. I mean, that is a major initiative for you guys, right?
Yeah, so back in the midsummer, our board met virtually and had a strategic planning session, and hydrogen, we were given the direction to develop a roadmap for hydrogen and what that means for the association. So more and more hydrogen is being used to move to a non-carbon economy. I have numbers here. I think they say that by 2030, the hydrogen economy in the US could generate an estimated $140 billion in revenue and support 700,000 jobs. By 2050, it could drive growth by generating $750 billion, almost $1 trillion, and 3.4 million jobs. And so hydrogen, is being looked at to hydrogen. We're sort of focused on the mobility aspect, basically fuel cells and cars and transportation. Right. I mean, hydrogen is looking at all different aspects of the economy, whether it be for manufacture of cement or in steel mills. It's got these huge potential opportunities across the industry as we move to decarbonize the economy.
Yeah,
What we're focused on is where it kind of comes in touch with the consumer, and that really is in hydrogen fueled vehicles. And so we've developed a task force, a strategy task force, to understand where that industry is, where do the standards we have today fit into that, and then where are the gaps? And those gaps more and more tend to be around what we'll call, hydrogen fueling facilities, gas stations, like the hydrogen, how far they should be set back from tanks of hydrogen, where they can be sited with respect to other stores and other businesses.
One of the challenges you have with hydrogen, right, is it's odorless, right? And there's no color. You can't see it. You can't smell it.
That's right.
And of course, now in natural gas, they ended up adding, a smelliant, right? So you could know that you've got a natural gas. Do you think that might be something coming along for hydrogen when you're going to be fueling an automobile or a car, or what do you think on those areas?
Yeah, I don't really know about that, but that's the perfect example of some of the challenges that we're dealing with. So, we think of hydrogen as this very industrial chemical, but suddenly there is, your average person on the way home from the office stops at a hydrogen fueling station, is taking a nozzle hydrogen and putting into the car. There's all sorts of potential challenges and dangers associated with that.
Yeah.
Other challenges we're dealing with that today, hydrogen tanks can't go through tunnels, right? Most cities and towns they don't allow these tanks to go through tunnels. Well, that's going to create real challenges if you want to move into a hydrogen economy where vehicles, whether they be automobiles or trucks, are going to be fueled. How do you get the fuel to those stations if you can't go through a tunnel in a city?
Right.
Over some bridges? Things like that really cause challenges, and that's some of the things we're focused on. How that plays out for the distributors is to be determined, but we do know that hydrogen is going to have a huge place in the future economy.
Yeah. And do you see that as a local thing that gas distributors could be involved in? I mean, is this the frontier opportunity market similar to cannabis, where you can get in there and find a way to be a hydrogen distributor or producer or manufacturer of hydrogen?
I would say certainly to pay attention to the market. Like I can't say for sure what the role of distributors would be and how quickly it'll move to that. But when we talk about moving the entire economy to a hydrogen base, there's certainly going to be opportunities for distributors. I don't know exactly what those are today, but they're going to be coming along. So I would say just watch that market.
Yeah. As your Compressed Gas Association team also worked on liquid natural gas, LNG and CNG, compressed natural gas. You also worked on different aspects of that as well, right?
That's right. Yeah, we have standards around those markets as well.
Yeah. Now, one of the things you have, which I think is really cool, you've developed some posters for the industry to hand out to the end user. So the end user would actually be able to hand that to their customers. So whether in the medical or depending on the industry, they can hand that poster. Would you mind touching on the key posters you right now have available that they can get to an end user?
Yeah, so for end users, we have one on home oxygen safety, the safe use of liquid nitrogen in food and beverages, the medical oxygen supply chain. As we mentioned earlier, we have a brand new one on dry ice, handling and transportation of dry ice. So all of those are downloadable for free on our website, cjnet.com. And then the distributors can take those, they can print them out in different sizes, and then they can give them to end users to make sure that the end users know how to deal with the product.
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant the way you guys put it on your website, so that you can just download it, print it out, get it up right away. Are they also pre-printed if you wanted to order some pre-printed, or is it just purely a download that you get from us?
Right now, we're just doing download. Right now, we're doing a download. A company could download them and print off of that. We also have, I do believe we also offer the artwork. If someone wants to do really high quality, they can get the artwork from us and download.
That's great. You could probably even send the file to a Kinko's or someplace could print some out for you if you don't have the right color copier that could do that. Because they are beautifully done in color, so I think that they really stand out well. And they're really easy to digest. They make sense if you're from an end user perspective. They're not highly, it's not so in-depth technical. You can really grab what that's all about.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, they're made for the end users. For instance, the one that we have on liquid nitrogen and food and beverage, I think there's two different versions of that, but that really is geared towards either the kid at an ice cream stand that might be dealing with some sort of nitrogen, or a bartender who might be dealing with some sort of liquid nitrogen in cocktails.
Right.
There's a lot of graphics, really easy to understand. Do this, don't do that. They're really geared towards the end user.
The one that, and I'm going to use my little moment here to make this statement, is helium. And it's interesting. I watch movie after movie where they introduce helium into it as a humorous thing to change your voice and what they do. And of course, like a lot of things in movies, they're not realistic to what can happen to you in a danger way. And it's interesting how much marketing has been done in the movies. I blame it on the movies from my viewpoint. People see it as a humor thing, but what they're not seeing is asphyxiation, right? I mean, you can get asphyxiation as well as if you use the nozzle or something, the amount of pressure in your lungs, actual capacity, you can damage your lungs. You can, really die from this type of thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, State Farm aired a commercial during the Super Bowl, in which it was supposed to be, the Super Bowl, as everyone tries to make them funny. So there was a helium tanker truck. There was an accident in a tunnel, and the helium truck had jackknifed. There was a leak, and everyone was getting out of their car, and suddenly everyone was speaking with a high duck voice, like helium. We saw that ad, and I wrote a letter to the CEO over at State Farm, explaining the dangers with respect to helium, and asked them to take the ad down. Now the ad did not run again, whether that had to do with our letter or not, but we take that stuff really seriously.
Yeah.
They were trying to make a funny, moment there, but it's dangerous. I mean, you would die if you were in that tunnel and that helium truck jackknifed and you stayed there, you would be asphyxiated.
Right, asphyxiation, right. And you can't see it, you're right, it just, right. Well, I appreciate you give us a peep. And I think you also have information, CJ has information on the helium as well, I believe.
We do. And actually, those posters I mentioned were just end user posters. We have, I don't know, probably 20 or so posters. Some of them focused more on industrial audiences.
Yeah.
The helium, actually, on our website, we have a video around helium dangers as well.
Okay.
So, cjanet.org, there's a lot of .com. There's a lot of information there for the distributors to take a look at. And
the Compressed Gas Association, if you want to get involved more, what's the steps to take? If you want to be involved, you want to be on a committee, what steps does somebody take?
So a couple of things they should do. First of all, they should join GATA, because we work very closely with GATA, and GATA is the association for distributors, and we work very closely with GATA. And once they're a member of GATA, they can participate in our safety statistics program, which gives them access to the standards and the guidelines and the posters and things like that. They could also join CGA, and by joining CGA, they could actually sit on committees, help write standards, learn more in depth how you deal with the standards. So either of those things is a great way to learn more about the industry.
Yeah. And GATA is an outstanding organization, because that's another organization that's really all the different gas distributors that want to make sure they have the safest and best practices they possibly can have in the marketplace. And they've done an outstanding job as well. And I know you guys have partnered together on many things, and that's a great partnership. So I cannot say more about GATA and what a great benefit it brings for people, not only for safety, but also best practices on running your business. And that's another organization that's just some fine individuals on it. I think many of the people in GATA, there's a number of them on your board as well.
Yeah, we have and actually GATA, John Espina, who's the executive director of GATA, sits on our board, as well as the president of GATA sits on our board in a non-voting capacity. One of the things that we've partnered with GATA in the past few years is developing e-learning modules, their training modules. I think we have 6 of them now, and they're on topics like safe handling of acetylene cylinders, filling of high-pressure medical oxygen cylinders. And what they are is they're like 30 to 45-minute, modules that you sit through, and there's training, and then there's tests throughout them, and you get to you have to pass the test before you go on to the next section. And it's a great way for distributors to train new employees or to retrain existing employees, and those are available through GATA or CGA if you're a member of either organization as well.
Right. And to touch on that, by being a member of GATA, then you have access to the CGA files to be able to get all those good assets that you guys have, right?
That's right. Yep, absolutely.
That's
absolutely
great. So Rich, I really appreciate your time today. I've found it very informative for myself. I've over the years really enjoyed working with you and your association. I would like to ask you if there's a couple key things that stand out at you that you thought that, from your working in CGA that really stand out at you that you'd like to throw out there. It could be a fun thing, funny thing, interesting thing, scary thing, but I'm putting you on the spot. I know that, but there might be something there that just kind of comes top of the mind. You say, that's one of those ones that stands out.
Geez, I don't know. You kind of put me on the spot there. I can't think of anything funny. I want to go back to something you said at the very beginning about the smart people involved in CGA, and I'd say Goddard as well. But people should consider getting involved with CGA for that, just to learn. I mean, these people they're the tops in their profession around the world, right? They're number one, and you can sit in a room with them and talk with them and have cocktails with them at the events, and really learn about the people who really are defining and driving this industry. So I would definitely recommend getting involved for that reason, if for no other reason.
Right. Yeah, it's extremely rewarding. I agree with you. Well, great. Well, thank you again for being on the Rodder Manufacturing's podcast today, High Pressure. And you have a wonderful rest of your week. And thanks again for all your help and time and what you do with the Compressed Gas Association. So thank you.
Thank you, George. You too. These podcasts you're putting together are great. So thanks for having me. I was happy to be here.
You're welcome.
Okay.